Y'all want to watch me own two people at once?
Single mothers by far have the highest rate of abuse towards children.
That's actually a really easy question to answer. That's because the fathers are not present, and this is not the flex you think it is.
First and foremost, the only person flexing here is you. And if you feel the need to flex over this type of discussion, my question is, what are you compensating for? Because if I was acting this way as a white hetero man, you would say I had small dick energy. Third and finally, this is not the gotcha moment you think it is.
Between the two, and every single study that I read about this statistic clearly states somewhere in the study that the only reason that the statistics are like this is because there are significantly more single mothers than there are single fathers.
And if you didn't take my comment out of context, you would have noticed 5 seconds before you stitched my video, I literally addressed the why that is.
And if you're going to argue that women are leaving these relationships for their safety or for the safety of their kids, explain to me why single mothers by far have the highest rate of abuse towards children.
So yeah, women file for 70% of divorces, initiate 70% of breakups, and win 80% of child custody back. Only 1 out of 5 states actually recognize fathers' rights to have 50-50 custody with their child. In 4 out of 5 states, it's an uphill battle for the average man. Even in cases where the mother is clearly abusing the child and the father is suing for full custody to save the child. What's even worse is in this particular case, the court was sooner to put the child in foster care before giving it to the father, and even the foster parents warned against giving the child back to the mother. And you can say that most of these child custody arrangements are decided outside of court. Most criminal convictions come with a plea bargain. It's funny that people like you always want to talk about systemic bias or how it's a pay-to-win system until it goes against your political narrative. It is quite literally cheaper to just pay child support than fight the child custody bias, especially when many states will force the non-custodial parent to pay for the other parent's attorney in this situation. You're not just paying your own attorney, you're paying for the other custody. You might as well just go ahead and pay the child support. Anyway, y'all want to see the next guy?
He was 7. He mouthed off to his dad, and his dad threw a glass ashtray.
Yeah, my mom did similar stuff to me all the time. She also used to kneel on top of my shoulders and repeatedly smack me until my mouth bled. Basically a grown woman ground and pounding her own child UFC style. Of course she stopped when I hit puberty and I was strong enough to defend myself, but my problems didn't end there. Because then she would call the police and have them beat me up for her. And this is actually something that's really common among abusive women, because they're not always going to abuse you personally. They're going to get other men to abuse you for them. They often use false accusations or even coercion in order to do this, which, by the way, is a crime. It's called incitement. And in all seriousness, women who partake in this should be going to jail for it, but more often than not, they're not. A good example of violence by proxy includes this father trying to pick up his son from his ex-wife's house while she refused to hand him over, which, by the way, was ignoring a court order. But instead of handing the son over, she got her new husband to shoot her ex-husband for her. Then there was this bodega clerk in New York City who was almost charged with manslaughter when he used legal self-defense to defend himself when a customer attacked him. Actually, he wasn't the customer. His girlfriend was, and she wasn't able to afford her groceries. So she got her boyfriend to go do her dirty work because she wasn't getting her way. Thankfully, thanks to public backlash, this man was let go because he was really just defending himself. Oh, and then there was the slap heard round the world. I don't really have to touch on this at all.
And how men abuse children, how they do it,
You tweaking, bro? You tweaking? Because you're acting like a tweaker. I mean, we already went over the unaliving of 6-year-old Eli Hart. What this headline doesn't tell you is that, the mom used a shotgun. Do you know how shotguns work? That's not a pretty sight at all. You brought up how your friend's dad threw a glass ashtray at him. This woman was throwing bottles in a grocery store at an innocent man. And this was the comment section on that video, somehow trying to make him out to be the bad guy. Kind of like how you two are trying to deflect the blame to men when women do bad things to children. Or bad things in general, because even when women are acting out in violence, it's never their fault. This 24-year-old Wisconsin teacher assaulted a 5th grader. This cheerleader unalived her own newborn child. Not to mention the growing number of teachers who are grooming young boys in the education system. Or the fact that even daycare workers can unalive a toddler and serve no jail time. It's not like women can stab their boyfriend over 100 times and avoid prison as well. All because the judge finds pity on them because they were a little high on that reefer. Yeah, totally makes sense. Or the fact that women can also avoid jail time when they get pregnant with a minor's child then turn around and get awarded child support from the minor they molested. And the reality is, this blatant criminal justice bias is nothing new. Even feminist icon Susan B. Anthony called it out during her own trial nonetheless. When Lizzie Borden was being investigated for unaliving her parents with an axe, she was allowed to keep the dress that detectives thought she used to unalive her parents. Then she burned it the day before the trial so it couldn't be used against her. Bonnie Elizabeth Parker was actually charged for one of the early bank heists in Bonnie and Clyde's career. She turned on the waterworks on the stand and the jury just let her go. And she immediately went back to robbing banks. Carrie Nation was a radical feminist in Prohibition, famous for running around the state of Kansas smashing up bars and saloons with a tomahawk. She was never charged or convicted for any crime. She was basically just arrested, detained for the night, and let go the next day. Do you think an old man would have been given the same leniency that she was? And you don't have to look very hard to find women who deify serial killers like Aileen Wuornos. Like seriously, so many feminist groups make this woman out to be a martyr, even though she admitted towards the end of her life that a lot of the claims she made about her victims were untrue. But why should I be surprised that a generation of women who like to weaponize their own trauma as a justification for their own toxic and violent behavior would deify a woman like Aileen Wuornos? But enough anecdotes. Let's look at the raw data. Convictions alone, women outpace men. Go based on peer-review research, women are 3 times the rate as men. Even in situations when both parents are involved with the child's life, mothers far outpace fathers. It's not even close. But let's not even talk about child abuse. Let's talk about interpartner violence. According to both the CDC and the Domestic Violence Hotline, both lesbians and bisexual women report the highest rate of abuse overall. Keep in mind, lesbians and bisexual women at most make up only 13% of the population. That's maybe 1 out of 9 women, but they account for 1 out of 8 cases of domestic violence against women. Not to mention, if we go back to divorce rates, lesbians are ahead of hetero women. And they often cite the same reasons that hetero women cite when they leave a relationship. The consistency is obvious here. And even if we just look at heterosexual couples, women, according to both the CDC and the Domestic Violence Hotline, perpetuate the most one-sided abuse in interpartner relationships. However, only 10% of men are willing to go to the authorities or the police to report this type of abuse, and for good reason. Of the small 10%, that's 1 out of 10 men who do report being in an abusive relationship to the authorities, 2 out of 3 end up getting falsely accused by their abuser. And we all know who's taken seriously if it's his word versus her word. No matter how you look at it, women are not innocent. They're just as violent as men, they're just less likely to be held accountable for it. And even if they are not the ones committing the violence personally, they are manipulating others, mostly men, to do the dirty work for them. Which kind of makes sense when you realize that female rulers throughout history were 20% more likely to be warmongers. There's a consistency at play here. And the reason women are able to get away with all this violent behavior and all this manipulation is because of people like y'all constantly making excuses for it. Anytime someone tries to have a discussion about this type of problem, the first thing y'all do is try to deflect away and put the blame on men. Even when women are clearly in the wrong, it's somehow the man's fault. I would say make it make sense, but you can't. It doesn't make sense. Women are not these divine angelic beings who fell out of a magic unicorn pussy in the sky. They are part of the same flawed Homo sapien species that men are.